What's up, guys? So Joseph here again, and this is a brand new video. We'll learn a small little concept about how you can cancel fetch requests, or in short, how you can cancel your AJAX requests that you make from your browsers. So I already have an article on this which covers few details with an example, but we will go over the example and do some live coding session. So for that, I already have my code editor, and this is my previous example which I already created. Let's create a brand new one. So let's go into the folder and create a new one. So let me open this in terminal. All right, so the folder is now in my terminal, and let's create a new folder. Anything, guys, so you can just name it anything. And so this is the folder that's created. Now let's go inside it and create a new file, index.html file, and this is my HTML file here. So this is where we will write our code and try out our example. So now one good thing with Visual Studio is that you can actually have shortcuts for HTML, the whole HTML page. So you can just type in HTML and then select HTML5, so it just creates a template for you with the viewport meta tag and everything necessary. Alright, so we have our page ready. Let's just jump in with some few HTML tags. This is just for an example I'm writing, so that once we start our server we see at least something. Alright, let's save this file. Now let's start our server. To start a local server, I'm already using a global npm module which is known as serve, so I'll be running that. Unfortunately, this doesn't have browser sync or hot reloading, but it's okay. We'll refresh the page because this is a small example. Okay, so to start the serve server, you say serve -s and give it the current folder, so it'll automatically pick up the index.html file. So this should start my local server. Alright, so there you go. It started my server at localhost 5000. So let me go into my browser and start localhost 5000. As you can see, the HTML tag is there. Now let's enhance it further. So let's add the code how to cancel and make an AJAX or a fetch request. So first of all, what I'll do is I'll just add a normal button here, so that on click of a button we can actually go ahead and make a AJAX call. So we say it make a call. Let's give it an ID and say make button. Alright, so go and refresh the page. The button should appear now. So there's the button. Let's add some scripts. So for that I'll use my script block here itself. I'm not going to create an external JavaScript file, rather I'll write my script here. Alright, so let's get a reference of the button. I'll copy the ID and just have some constant, a variable basically. So I call it const make button reference, and then I can go ahead and query it and put the ID here with the hash. Alright, so the button reference is available. Now let's add a click event listener to it, so that once I click on the button I can go ahead and make a fetch call. So on click, I'll give it an arrow function, and this is my event listener. For now, let's put a console log. Let's see if this works. And let's refresh, rather hard reload, and clear the console and click on it. Alright, so this works. So the button click is working. Now, as an example, let's try to make a fetch call first. Let's see if we can receive some data from my server. So for that, I'll be using a fake JSON server which I regularly use for my examples, and this is the URL, so you can try the same. Let's called request response.in/API/users. So this is my sample test URL, and this is where I'll make the fetch call. So I start with fetch and put in the URL since this is a get call. But wait, fetch actually returns a promise, so we'll have to resolve the promise, and for that I always prefer the async await syntax. So I'll rename or restructure my event listener as an async function. It's an asynchronous function, and use an await syntax here so that till the promise is resolved from the fetch, we will wait for this particular line to get executed and then move further down. So for that, I will assign the response to a response variable and await on the promise to resolve. So what does the promise here do is that since you're making the API call, the browser is not freezed. So the JavaScript main thread can still go and do some other actions. It can take user inputs. So this is necessary, that's why you await on the promise to resolve. So once the response comes back to your browser, that's when the promise resolves, and then you can do further action. Also, always note that since you are using an async and await, so always wrap your code in a try catch. So let me go ahead and add a try catch block. And this is my catch where I'll handle the error. Let's print a log. That's it. So let's add a log here and try to see the response object. Okay, so this is a basic fetch call example where I'm making a AJAX call or a fetch call to this particular API, which should return me some JSON response. And let's go ahead and try this in our browser. So I have refreshed. This is my network panel, so you should see a call here once I click on the button. All right, so here's the call. The call went ahead to the server responded back with 200, and this is the preview, so you got some data here. And if you open the data object from the response, you can see all the response that is sent back to us from the server. So these are the user objects, so you can actually go ahead and query for one single user and clear this up and call it again with. So I'm calling for the data for the first user, and this is the data that's coming back. All right, so but then if you see our log here, which we tried to print here, so that's still the response object too, which is still another promise, and we need to resolve that to get our raw data. So if you see here response, you can only see the status property, which is true. Response.OK true, that means the request happened and went ahead and it was successfully processed. So to get the raw data from the response, let's resolve the promise that is being returned by the response object. So we'll await on the response and then we say JSON. So this is where the JSON that is returned by the promise, the response object will be resolved and then put it into the data object. So let's print the data here. Now you should get the raw data that comes from the server. All right, so this is the data that's come back from the server. So we have seen an example where we made a basic fetch call to the server. It's a get call, and then the data comes back to us, and then we can actually work with the data. All right, so now I'm moving on to the next part. So we'll see how you can cancel the fetch request or abort a fetch request. So for that, you may have a question, why I want to abort a fetch request. So there can be several reasons, but the most obvious to me are that, say if you make a call and your network is slow or something happens in between, you usually have a timeout of, let's say, 1 second or 2 seconds. So if within 2 seconds the response doesn't come back, you can go ahead and abort the request that you made. So in that way, the browser, whatever it was doing, so it can still go ahead and process, and your battery consumption will be less. Another example can be, say, in your current page, you had made a request to the server for some data, and the response took some time to come back to you. Meanwhile, the user or you who is using the app moves on to some other page. So in that case, since you are navigating away from the current page, you can cancel the request that you had already meant and then move on to the next navigated page. Alright, so for that, what we'll do is we'll add another button here, and let's call it a cancel button. So you're just naming it as cancel call, and let's give it an ID, cancel button. So in my JavaScript, now let's get a reference of that button. Sorry, I'll paste it here, and using my DOM APIs, I can query the element and get my button reference here. Similarly, what I'll do is that for the cancel button also, I will add an event listener so that once you click on the cancel button, you can cancel the fetch request. So the arrow function here, and for now let's just print a log and go back to my browser and do a refresh. So let's click on this, so you can see the log is appearing, so that means the button is working. Alright, now the main part, let's see how to cancel the fetch request. So for that, the JavaScript APIs have introduced two new API, which is abort controller and abort signal. So in short, this is how it looks: abort controller, and then you have another one called abort signal. So both of these APIs actually gives you more control of the fetch requests, so they can monitor your fetch requests. With the abort controller, you make a new instance of the controller, and then from that instance you can actually get the signal, the abort signal instance, and then when you are making a call, you can pass that signal to your fetch request, so that when you are trying to cancel the fetch request with the controller, your signal will be notified of that cancel. So let's see how to do that. So first, let's define a controller instance here, which is initially null. Every time you make a call, you can create a new instance of your controller, which will be an abort controller. Okay, so it's simple. So you just create a new instance of the abort controller, and then from the controller instance, you can get a signal instance, which is just inside the controller object. Now this is the signal object that you will be passing with your fetch request. So fetch, as you know, the first argument is the URL, and the second part is where you can pass more options to the fetch requests. Like for example, you can pass your method. Since this is get, it's by default get, so you need not pass it, but you can also specify for maybe better documentation. You can pass headers, you can pass more data in the body if you're making a post call, and this is where we'll also pass our signal objects. So you can see here signal, and let's pass the signal that we have created. Alright, so now my fetch request that I'll make to the server is being monitored by our controller and then the signal instance. Let's see if this works first. Let's go to the network panel and make a call. So the call is going ahead and we are getting that data. So let's see in the console. Yeah, so we are getting data here, and now we can go ahead and cancel it. So for that, what I'll do is that the API that I'm using supports features of delay. So you can actually delay the response so that you get enough time to cancel it. So for that, I'll just add delay of 5 seconds. And let's see if this works. So let's make a call. So we are waiting for the response. So this is the call that went ahead. It's still pending. Now the response came back. So it took around 5 seconds to come back. Alright, so everything works fine. Now let's look at how to cancel. So we already have the cancel button here, and this is where we'll add our cancel logic. So let's comment this line, and to cancel a fetch request that you have already made, we'll be using the controller object that we have created. So the controller object supports an abort method which we'll be using to cancel our fetch request. So for that, first check if the controller object is available, and then say controller.abort. So this is how you will abort your fetch request. Alright, so I've refreshed my browser now, my network panel is empty. Let's make a call. So we made a call and canceled it. As you can see here in the network panel, so this says it's cancelled. And if you go here on the response panel, so there's no response because you have already cancelled. If I open the details of the request headers, and also you can see it was a normal HTTP request, but then it got cancelled since we used the abort method. So you can see the status here. Now when you are cancelling your fetch request with a controller abort method, so obviously the promise that was supposed to be resolved here will be rejected. Since it is rejected, so your control will go to the catch block, and this is where you can handle the rejection. So if you now see in the console block panel, so you can see that it happened. So a DOM exception happened, and you can see the user aborted a request. So this is where the control had come. All right, so this was a small example of how you can use abort controller and abort signal APIs to actually cancel a fetch request. So this is pretty helpful, and I'm sure you'll give it a try. Till then, see you. Bye.